Good morning. So in recent times, like previously in medicine, I think the focus was always on physical health. And for a long time, people just thought that, physical health was the only important thing. But over time, people then began to realize that, mental health is essential even for physical health. In fact, we might even say that mental health is a prerequisite for physical health because we know that sound mental health affects recovery and wellness. And also how that people have now moved from before, where the issue was just trying to get people from a sense of being sick. And once they're, not sick, then that's okay. And now people have realized that it's more than just about not being sick. You actually need to be well. And so there's been a lot of emphasis in terms of self-care for all kinds of people, and a lot more people have been involved in self-care. And in our practice, we're seeing more and more people understanding the need to not just be unsick, if I can use that term, but to actually be well. And also realizing that self-care is actually something that's a protective factor for your own health, whether it's physical or mental health. So my outline today will be focused on defining what self-care is, why we have to self-care, and what are the effects of lack of it actually, and how to self-care, and then look at biblical examples of Jesus and different people that we can learn from in the Bible. So in starting to talk about what self-care is, most people think about self-care in terms of, these days, I think it has been misunderstood to be something that's just focused on physical aspects and material aspects. So if somebody goes to eat at a nice place, then, they'll say they're self-caring. Or if somebody goes shopping, then, they'll talk about having to self-care. But when we talk about self-care, what we really want is things that determine whether you're productive and fulfilled and living well in your life, okay? So being the ultimate version of yourself, being the version that, getting to that full potential that God wants you to be. So we consider the different components of a person's life, because we can't talk about wellness and self-care in just your nails, for example, and then your nutrition and hygiene is not okay. So we have to have holistic health. And in talking about the holistic care of the person, we look at what we have now come to understand as the 8 dimensions of wellness. So the intellectual, the need for you to use your intellect to grow and thrive as a person, your emotional, so the need for you to have your feelings well managed and under either control or being able to not interfere with your day-to-day lives, your spiritual connection, because we have come to understand, and when I say we, I mean the world in general, that, we are spiritual beings. And actually lots and lots of studies have shown that resilience is actually higher when people have a spiritual connection. And then environmental, because our environment also does things to us that can be torturous or prevent us from thriving as human beings. And financial, because it can also cause different types of stress. Occupational, because it brings a sense of fulfillment and meaning in our lives. Social, because as human beings, we were meant to be in a social environment. And so our key relationships are essential. And physical as well, for obvious reasons. We're talking about health. So why should we self-care? First of all, I think it's a fact that we are finite beings. We see that even Moses was so burnt out with his work. In fact, at some point he got so depressed that he was ready to die and not go ahead with the work that he was doing. And when you think about Moses, I particularly spoke about him because this is somebody who met face to face with God. Like, how much more anointing could that be? He came from being in the presence of God, and literally his face shone all over with just the glory of God. But he too got to a place where, you know, his resources were limited. And then also, lack of self-care is really poor stewardship of God's resources. So we know that our bodies are really the temple of God, and we are not our own, we are God's. So when we are not taking care of ourselves, when we are not managing our resources in terms of who we are, and we then get to a place where we are depleted, we are run down, and we're not thriving, then we are not managing ourselves in the way that would glorify God. And I also wanted to give an example of Elijah, because when we look at Elijah, this is somebody who was doing great as well in his walk with God. He actually, in the picture there, I think the illustration is just after God had come down for him amidst 400 prophets of Baal. And this was a triumphant man. I mean, when you listen to his mockery of the prophets of Baal, you find somebody who was confident. He had a great relationship with God. He knew God was going to come through for him. So he was not second guessing and wondering, is God going to show up for me? When he then set up his sacrifice on the altar, and then he was teasing the prophets of Baal, or maybe your God is sleeping. Maybe, you know, you need to scream louder and wake him up. And after coming from such a victory, you know, he literally slaughtered all the 400 prophets of Baal. And then he hears a word that Jezebel is after him. And he runs off to some wilderness. And while he's there, he's exhausted, totally exhausted. And what does he say to God? Or just take me and die. And that just doesn't make sense. You know, you just came from such a victorious thing. First of all, why are you running away from one man when God has come through for you? But secondly, why do you want to get to this point of death? And we see how God then ministered to Elijah. He initially gave him shade. He gave him a place where he could have rest. He was given food. And once he was refreshed, it was now possible to have a reasonable conversation with Elijah. And that's when God showed up to then reassign him. And I feel that for me, that's an indication of how when we are spent and when we're exhausted and when we're at those points where we're totally burnt out, we can be of no use, even when we have been called to mighty things and have been coming from very victorious times in our walks with God. So maybe just to discuss also some of the practical effects of poor self-care. I like this. Tired doctors make mistakes. This is whether you're a Christian Holyfield, Ghostbuster, tongue talker, you will make mistakes if you're tired. And that's something you can't avoid. So your work output will be poor. You may end up being depressed. We already spoke about people like Moses and Elijah, who from just work exhaustion, they were depressed. You will find yourself isolated from others because your social skills are poor at that time. It requires too much energy to connect to people. And what's terrible about that is that those are the very people that you need to then refresh you and encourage you. But because it requires so much energy, you end up withdrawing from them. And then you find yourself doing things which are uncharacteristic of Christians, like being absent from work. You end up with lowered immunity and poor health, as you can imagine, because you're just burnt out. And then also poor interpersonal skills. And at this point in time, like I said, it's one of those things which then feels like it requires a lot of energy for you to be polite, to use a nicer word than just to say, come here, give me that, as opposed to, could you please come here? Could you give me that? And so on. So that obviously affects the personality that you are. And, you know, I don't know whether you will be a bright, shining city on a hill. as bright if you have poor interpersonal skills, and so on. And I just wanted to focus on something that's a little bit different. So, during this COVID period, we've done a couple of workshops just supporting frontline health workers with just some help during this psychosocial support during this COVID period. And I think one of the things that I realized is that apart from being a frontline worker, apart from being a doctor, Christians are prone to stress and burnout more than others. The first few points I will mention are really just general to the medical doctor. But I think as we go on, you understand why Christians tend to be prone to stress and burnout more than others. So first of all, the nature of the job of being a health worker is actually quite stressful because, first of all, you don't have one solution for each patient. Every patient has different challenges. You could have two diabetics who are the same age, same sex, and presenting at the same time, but they all have different dimensions to it. So the solution is something that you constantly have to redefine for each patient. Unlike a person, for example, who's selling food at a takeaway, they give chicken burgers, it's chicken burgers. They know their product, they can even replicate it and just have, they can even automate it, so to speak. But for us, every single patient requires decision-making and engagement. And it's live, it's live, it's not like you can sort of leave your patient and say, let me leave this problem for a little bit and think about it and then come back. The patient is right in front of you. You have to constantly be making decisions and engaging and calling upon knowledge that you've had from the past. And that can be very stressful. And then also the nature of health workers, that we often tend to work when other people are not working. For example, you have weekends, other people have family times, and you find yourself having to excuse yourself from a number of activities, working at nights when other people are not working. During this COVID period, there's been people who actually were allowed to work from home, which is not a privilege you have. And also, apart from that, also having the privilege of not working because, we're trying to protect our office. Someone had COVID, so we've closed down the whole office. Nothing like that happens to you. You still have to get up and work and be in the front line, even when businesses have sort of closed down and there's complete lockdown. You have to get up and get out there. And that obviously increases risk of infection for yourself. It increases adrenaline and, tension and anxiety. And also just the fact that some of the jobs that, some of the roles that we have to do in medicine mean that we're deciding whether somebody lives or dies. And it's constant, it's action oriented every time. It's like a thriller movie. You can't stop. It's not like you can take a holiday. It's constant. You constantly have to deal with that. And if you're working in the emergency room, it's even more stressful because you can't just be off even for a second. And then sometimes we have to work with non-team players. And, I'm saying this knowing that I'm talking to a lot of people who are working in African settings. And usually there's a team member who makes sure they take long lunch breaks. They come early, they come late, knock off early, and you just can't rely on them. And that usually means that the other team players who are supposed to take up the roles end up having to take on the roles of that person who's not doing their part. And that can be very stressful. And sometimes losing patience, and you don't have time to grieve. You've worked with this patient for some time, you've gotten attached to them, and all of a sudden they've lost their life. It's not like people will say, oh, you just lost the patient, maybe you should take the afternoon off. No, you still have to work, tuck in your grief, and then continue working, so to speak. So those things just make people more prone to stress and burnout. And for us believers, there's a high standard of work required of us, not just by our faith, but it's also expected of us in the community. Even when you do something, people will actually say to you, but you're a Christian, you can't just do that. You can't just be absent. So even if you decided you wanted to backslide for a day, you have some of those things happening, and then your own guilt, because the Holy Spirit constantly convicts us about sin. So you find that most of the times we feel guilty that, should I be caring for myself? Should I be thinking about my care and when somebody else is suffering? And so we end up giving of ourselves until we're totally burnt out, because we keep thinking, if I think about self-care, that is selfish, that is not godly, and so we find ourselves more burnt out than the average doctor. And then kingdom work is also full-time work. I noticed that a number of the speakers are medical doctors, but they're also pastors. And so I personally don't believe in such a thing as full-time ministry, because I think that for believers, ministry is full-time all the time. Whether I am doing my work, which other people may consider secular work, the Bible clearly says whatever we do in word or deed, we should do it to the glory of God. And so that means that we're constantly doing kingdom work, and that's full-time work as well. And whereas other people can, sort of decide, even when we talk about meeting together as believers, if somebody decided, today I just won't go to the bar, and I think the whole week I won't drink, and so on. For us believers, it's not something that we can just do. For us, it's something that, we constantly think about. We should meet together as believers. We should share the gospel when we get a chance. We should pray for other people, and so on. So that's, I think, another thing that affects a lot of believers when it comes to burnout. So how then do we self-care? As you recall earlier, I talked about 8 dimensions of wellness, but because self-care is such a huge topic, I would like us to focus on 5 aspects that will impact you, so that you constantly remember in future just some of the lessons that we can learn from today's sharing. So these will be the ACE. The ACE is something we use in psychology called the achievement, connection, and enjoyment. And it's a basic self-care tool that you can use to assess yourself if you're really caring for yourself. And I would like to add 2 aspects to the ACE, and that is rest and spiritual rejuvenation for us as believers, because those are vital. So in terms of the ACE, I will start with the sense of achievement. I just could not resist the opportunity to bring something from my country, because I really celebrated the time we won the Africa Cup. So I think that was a time of a great achievement. So I put in that picture. So in terms of achievement, what we really refer to is in terms of fulfillment from work. And we find that, when you do your work, there is a certain sense of fulfillment that is essential for you to feel well, to feel good as a human being. The Bible talks about how when we are skillful in our work, we find ourselves having this great sense of achievement where we are not ordinary. We are then above ordinary. We do not stand before obscure men, but before kings. So that's an important aspect, that you apply yourself in your work and do it as unto the Lord. And that's an important aspect of you thriving as a human being. Also, there's a sense in which, when you work hard, your sleep is more fulfilling. Your sleep is more restorative, and you have a sound mind. The next thing I want to talk about is connection. Connection is important, and we have, biblical backup for that. How good and pleasant it is for, all of us to dwell together in unity. In fact, when we look at 2 Corinthians 6, verse 11, we see what kind of connections we're talking about. So we're not talking about shallow connections like Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on. We're talking about deep connections. When Paul was talking to the Corinthians, he said to them, "Open wide your hearts to us. We have taken advantage of no one, and we would like you to trust us with who you are." And those are the kinds of deep connections that are essential for you to grow and thrive as a human being, for you to be caring for yourself. Connections become your support in times of hardship, in times of stress. So you need to have deep connections. And the Bible does say that, you know, these connections are not a connection which you kind of meet up once in a year and you can still call that a deep connection. They have to be frequent and relevant, just like we're encouraged not to be neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but all the more as we see the day drawing near. So just making sure that, you know, we are not isolating ourselves, but that together we are keeping the flame up, just like, you know, the logs on a fire manage to make a bonfire because of all the pieces coming together. It's a little bit awkward to speak when no one is speaking. So sometimes when you're doing these online presentations, you kind of wonder whether people can actually hear you, if you've been cut off or something.
We are really imbibing the teachings, quite deep and practical. We're here.
Okay, great.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
I did that. I've spoken before for several minutes and then realized after a while that I was disconnected. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so the ACE, the E part now that I want to talk about is the sense of enjoyment. And for believers, this sometimes is a problem. Like, you know, do we even have permission to do that? Is it something that we can do and so on? And so I loved it when I read this verse, which says also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. So God does want us to get to a place where we can enjoy and not be in bondage or laboring throughout, but, you know, we too need to enjoy. And how that having that kind of enjoyment is actually good medicine for us. In fact, in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 7, it says, "Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do." So when we talk about enjoyment, we talk about different kinds of things that actually refresh you. So it could be watching a movie, it could be gardening, it could be doing some kind of project around that, but something that refreshes you and makes you feel that you're relaxing. And so when we're talking about ACE with clients, generally what we say is that your day should consist of all those three elements. They may be in small portions or bigger portions, but it should consist of all those three elements. So you need to think about, at the end of the day, what did I achieve today? Who did I connect with today? And what did I enjoy today? So that you're constantly feeling that, you know, your days and your life are not going to waste, and you're then getting that sense of fulfillment in your life. So like I said, after this, I just want to talk about rest. Mark 6 verse 31 says, "And he said to them, 'Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat.'" Rest is very important. One of my habits, which I have, partly because, you know, my job is I feel like my job is very intense, but I think my job is very intense. I spend a lot of time listening to people's problems and things like that. And, you know, that can be quite intense and quite draining. And then apart from that, I have two small children, and I'm very involved in my family life. I'm very involved in my community at church. And so I need rest. So what I do is that every fortnight, I actually take a day out on my own and just spend it resting. And sometimes what I'll do is maybe I'll take a half of that day just sleeping, but if I need to do that, I would do that. I would do something that I like read a book or go to the spa or even have lunch with a friend. But that is a no work day. And it's also a day that I actually make sure I also disconnect from my day-to-day roles. And I make sure it's a weekday because then my kids can go to school and I really just have that time to reflect on my life as well. And so those are important things for us because we can't just be on the go all the time. It's exhausting, it reduces our efficiency, and we find that a lot of the times we're not even introspective about how our lives are going. Rest is important. Sometimes we feel that we need to work all the time, but the Bible clearly says that it is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil. For indeed, God gives sleep to his beloved. You know, a lot of times we feel sometimes that we are in control of even all the resources that we have. One of the things that I recently learned, which I think is an important lesson, is that God takes care of us, not because we work hard, but because he chooses to. And that's why he provides for us. And that's why we have the example of the birds in the field and so on, who he takes care of, even though they're not doing the kinds of things that we do. So also reaching a point where we can trust God. Overworking or workaholism is also an indication of a lack of faith, because we then feel that our toil and our work is what actually makes us provide for ourselves by itself alone, when it's actually God who provides for us. The other thing I wanted to talk about is spiritual rejuvenation. I think I explained earlier when we're talking about the 8 dimensions of wellness and how so many studies have shown that people who are spiritually connected have more resilience when it comes to managing stress or even physical health. And for us as believers, it's not even something that's an option, because we love God and we're connected to him. And so we just need to work hard at making sure we protect that time that we have with God. And clearly we see from scripture that, you know, those that wait upon the Lord, he gives them new strength. And this strength is not just spiritual strength, it's about physical strength that he talks about, how, you know, we're able to do things that even young people are failing to do. And that's not because of our own wisdom or our own fitness, but because of God's Spirit working in us. We see that, you know, God can actually send physical help to us when we're devoted to him. And one of the examples I like is just the example of the Ethiopian eunuch, who was really stuck about wanting to understand scripture, and he was having so many problems, and God physically sent Philip to just show up there where he needed him to be, baptize him. And as soon as that whole affair was done, Philip was literally transposed from where he was to a different location. Like God physically came through for this person who was being devoted to him. And God does those kinds of things to us when we connect to him. And apart from that, even just the wisdom that we need to, sometimes the stress comes because we just really have made poor choices in terms of our time management, in terms of our priorities and all those things. And we need wisdom from God to show us how to manage ourselves and our affairs. And that comes when we spend time with him, that he speaks to us. One of my favorite verses is James 1 verse 5, which says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who is able to give generously without showing reproach. So that's about devotion. And I feel that one of the other verses that I really like is 2 Chronicles 16 verse 9, which I think this is one of the principles of those who have more is given. And it says that the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. So when we are committed to God, God even goes extra to strengthen our hearts even more, to strengthen our beings even more. And then we're able to do even more than what we have been doing previously. I've met so many men of God. I've met so many men of God, and I'm just so surprised that, you know, how are these people managing to do so many things when I'm struggling? But then, you know, as they are getting closer to God, he's giving them more wisdom, more strength, and they're able to do so much more for the kingdom of God. The big question, did Jesus himself self-care? So I think that we see that already he worked a lot. So he had a lot of sense of achievement when we talk about the ACE. He even worked on the Sabbath if he had to. And then,
Dr. Akani,
yes?
You have about 2 minutes to wrap up.
Okay, thanks. We saw that he spent time with disciples as well. He opened up to them in John 13, verse 35. It talks about how he clearly opened up his heart to them and explained everything that he was about, which means he had really deep connections with them. He went to parties. He made wine at a wedding party, so we know he had a sense of enjoyment as well. And he was physically fit because he walked a lot. He took retreats and rested, literally left areas where there were so many people and rested. And he himself had his devotions. We know from even the age of 12 years old, he was arguing with religious leaders about scriptures, and he poured out his heart honestly to God. One of the examples we have is from the Garden of Gethsemane, where he really asked God to even take away the cup. I mean, that was why he came. And then here he was asking God to take away this cup. And then in the desert of temptation, he prayed, and God physically came through for him by sending angels to minister to him. So this is basically just a recap of what we've talked about, that self-care is care for your holistic person, and that there are 8 dimensions of wellness that we already ran through. That poor self-care compromises your work output, your relationships, and your health. That poor self-care is also poor stewardship of God's resources. That sometimes as Christians, we tend to be more prone to burnout and poor self-care. And we talked about the 5 self-care tips: the achievement, connection, enjoyment, the rest, and the importance of devotion. And finally, that Jesus too practiced self-care. So we have no excuse for not practicing it. Thank you for your time.